Our gospel passage this week is from Luke's Gospel, chapter 20. As I thought today, I wish I could know how the Thursday House Church approached this passage.
We saw
we got it in. Oh, good. This is Luke chapter 20, verses 27 to 38. Some Sadducees, those who say that there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living. For to him, all of them are alive. So if after listening to this passage, you are left thinking, that is a strange one to preach a sermon on. You are not alone. If I'm being honest, over the last week, as I have read it over and over and over again, in my impatient or frustrated moments, I've just thought, who cares? And other commentators that I came across this week have said similar things, but in a little bit nicer ways. Like, it's a bit strange that Luke included this story in his gospel. So it's a disagreement involving Sadducees, who were a faction of Judaism that actually probably didn't even exist anymore when Luke was writing his gospel. And it's a question that they ask him about resurrection. And in his answer, surprisingly, Jesus does not mention his own future resurrection, which he does in other parts of the gospel. And Jesus's resurrection is the entire reason that we, as Christians, believe in it. So it's strange that he didn't mention that. Sadducees were a priestly group who were associated with the temple. They were extremely conservative, and they only considered the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, to be authoritative. So the prophets, the Psalms, the wisdom books, the histories, none of these to them were considered scripture. And because there's no mention of resurrection in the Pentateuch, at least in their opinion, then it wasn't worth considering. There was no basis for the belief in an afterlife. This conversation that happens between the Sadducees and Jesus happens in the temple. And Jesus has been going to the temple every day, teaching there. And while he's been doing this, different groups have approached him and they've been challenging his authority. In general, they have been trying to discredit him in the eyes of the people. And to do this, they've tried to elicit controversial teachings from him, things that he would say that would get him in trouble with other religious groups. And so that's why the Sadducees have approached him and put forth this hypothetical situation. According to the Torah, if a man dies and leaves behind a wife but no children, it is the duty of his brother, or in some instances, another relative, to step in basically and take the dead brother's place, to marry his widow, and hopefully have children so that their lineage and name will continue. And this tradition also protected widows, because in the ancient world, it would be extremely difficult to survive without an immediate family. It's hard actually today to survive without a family. So they asked Jesus, okay, if this situation happened, woman has 7 different husbands, they keep dying, and they don't have any children. In the resurrection, who's she gonna live with? Now, I think it's clear that they're not actually interested in Jesus's answer. They've already decided that there is no resurrection. So it's a moot point. They're just trying to make him look foolish. They're trying to discredit the belief in resurrection by highlighting a contradiction. Obviously, the resurrection can't be real, because in the resurrected life, following the law would then create problems. The law was not written with resurrection in mind. And to the Sadducees, the law is the beginning and the end. The law is what we measure all other things against. The law dictates what is possible to the Sadducees. My guess is that Jesus knew what they were up to, that they were trying to trap him. But he actually still gives them an honest answer. He says, well, people in this life, people in this age, the one that we're living in now, marry and are given in marriage. But the people who will be resurrected, in that age, they will not have any use for marriage. There will be no need for marriage. Why? Because they can't die anymore. They won't need to get married because they can't die. An interesting logical jump. If you weren't going to die, why would you get married? Well, instead of using the law, and instead of looking at this life that we're living right now to determine what the afterlife will be like, Jesus flips that around. And he looks at marriage from the perspective of the resurrection. What's the point of marriage if death doesn't exist? And that sounds strange to us. Because in the modern era, at least in the Western world, we think of marriage, at least partly, in romantic terms. Who do I love? Who do I feel something for? But for ancient people, marriage was for survival. And not just personal survival, right? In Genesis, God tells humanity, be fruitful and multiply. Marriage was the way to have children and to raise children, to continue the human story, to sustain God's creation. If death doesn't exist, there is no need for us to do anything to sustain God's creation. But there is another more personal reason for marriage in the ancient world, at least for the Israelites, and I would imagine for other peoples as well. From what we could tell, the Sadducees were correct that traditionally, the Israelites did not believe in resurrection or an afterlife. What they truly wanted was long life here. But after death, there was no expectation of a meaningful existence. Life here, right now, was the gift. This was the good place that they wanted to be. Now, one of the things that made death bearable to them, the idea of death, made it acceptable and not a complete scandal, was procreation. The continuation of your own bloodline and your own lineage. In a sense, this was their version of the afterlife, the tangible way that they would continue to exist, right? In life, in the world, they would somehow continue to exist in the good place. So you can see why in the Sadducees' hypothetical situation, it is so important that the man's brothers keep marrying his widow. Because if his lineage does not continue, he is gone forever. So marriage as an institution was meant to preserve and prolong life. It creates family. It offers protection from hostile forces. And in a sense, protection from death. And Jesus gets to this truth immediately. In a way, in his answer, he acknowledges how much of our lives here, in this age, right? Our institutions, our relationships, our traditions and patterns, that they are a lot of times created to protect us from danger and death, and from psychological and emotional pain. The fear of becoming nothing, of disappearing into the void. And to simply protect us from loneliness in this life, right? Marriage and family and all kinds of relationships protect us from loneliness, and it's what gives us meaning. So I have a question for the people here who are married. How do Jesus's words sound to you? You don't have to answer this out loud. That in the resurrection, in the next age, people are not married. We will not be married. There is no need for marriage. To me, that sounds sad. It's a strange and uncomfortable thought to imagine life without my partner. And I would imagine the same is true, hopefully, for people in this room. But it does suggest how entirely different the next world, the next age will be. That it will make even our most important, our deepest and most intimate relationships pale in comparison. That they will be fundamentally different. I implied earlier that when I first started reading this passage this week, I had a tough time with it. Felt like I was trying to squeeze anything out of it that I could. And one way to look at a passage is to simply take note of anything that's repeated in it, right? These could be repeated words, phrases, images, and then these repeated things can point to underlying themes or ironies or meanings. So at a certain point, I thought, all right, let's get out the highlighter. What gets repeated in this passage? Any guesses? The woman? Maybe. Children, basically, is used 6 times in about as many verses. That's a lot. In the beginning of the passage, the Sadducees say, the man's brother dies, leaving a wife, but no children. And this continues through 7 different marriages, each one ending with the word childless. For an ancient Israelite, this is a disaster. But to this, Jesus answers in the resurrection. All of these people are like angels, and they are children of God. So they've gone from adults who are desperately trying to have children, trying to fight off death and non-existence, but in the resurrection, they become children again in some way. That they're transformed into their truest, most elemental form, children of God. Children taken care of by their parent and creator, so taken care of that it is hard to imagine. So taken care of that the need for marriage, as addressed in Genesis and the creation story, that all of that becomes irrelevant. Now, along with the word children, in the beginning of the passage, there are also a lot of relation words. Brother, wife, widow. But in the second half, everyone becomes simply an angel and a child. They all have the same parent, all are siblings. After his resurrection, Jesus taught his disciples to measure this life against the next life, to treat the next life as the truer reality, to live as people of the resurrection, children of the resurrection. That means living with the hope of that next reality. And that means not letting fear or scarcity dictate how we live in this age, right? We are called to live into that age now. And Jesus is the firstborn, the first child of that age. The one where we are simply children of God together. Amen.